She was the one who refilled the coffee before anyone noticed it was empty. The one who knew which fluorescent light in the third-floor hallway flickered exactly 3 times before going dark. She had worked at Hargrove & Associates for 6 years, and in 6 years, not a single partner had learned her last name. That didn't bother Nell Delaney the way people might expect. What bothered her, what she turned over in her mind every morning while pushing her supply cart past the glass-walled conference rooms, was that the company was about to make a catastrophic mistake. And every single person with the power to stop it was too comfortable to see it coming. Nell was 31 years old. She had a business degree from a state school in Ohio that she'd paid for herself, working weekends at a diner and nights at a call center. She had graduated with honors. She had applied to 43 jobs in her field and received 11 interviews and 0 offers. This was 2019. The market, people kept telling her, was tight. She'd taken the facilities position at Hargrove as a temporary measure. Temporary had stretched into a year, then 2, then 6. The way temporary things tend to do when the bills are real and the alternatives aren't. But she had never stopped paying attention. That was the thing about being invisible. You heard everything. The senior partners at Hargrove & Associates were preparing to launch what they called the Prestige Rebranding Initiative. Nell had heard about it first in fragments. A phrase here, a slide title there. The particular kind of hushed urgency that senior executives used when they believed the cleaning staff couldn't parse their vocabulary. Over 18 months, she had pieced together the full picture. Hargrove was a mid-sized financial consulting firm. Their bread and butter was small business advisory, helping local manufacturers, family-owned distributors, regional retailers understand their numbers and plan for growth. Their clients were, on average, the kind of people who drove pickup trucks and kept family photos on their office desks and worried about making payroll. Reliable clients, loyal clients, not glamorous but real. The Prestige Initiative was going to change all of that. The plan, as Nell understood it, was to reposition Hargrove as a premium wealth management firm targeting high-net-worth individuals. New logo, new office in the financial district, new pricing structure that would effectively push out their existing client base. The partners were convinced this was evolution. They had hired an outside consulting firm. The irony of that detail was not lost on Nell. And the outside firm had produced a beautiful, expensive deck showing projected revenue curves that climbed like ski slopes. What the outside firm had not done was talk to anyone who actually knew Hargrove's existing clients. Nell had. She had fixed the printer in Gerald Matsumoto's office on a Tuesday afternoon and spent 40 minutes listening to him describe how Hargrove's quarterly reviews had helped him avoid a cash flow disaster the previous spring. She had replaced a water filter in the break room while Dana Kessler, one of the junior advisors, was on the phone with a longtime client named Ruben who had specifically said, and Nell had written it down later in the small notebook she kept in her cart, "I don't need fancy. I need someone who picks up the phone." She had been in the elevator with 3 different clients on 3 different occasions, and not one of them had mentioned wanting a premium experience. All 3 had mentioned, in their own ways, that they stayed with Hargrove because Hargrove felt like a real relationship and not a transaction. The Prestige Initiative was going to incinerate every single one of those relationships, and the partners thought it was going to save the firm. Nell had done the math. She had done it in her apartment, on her personal laptop, after her shifts, using the publicly available data she could find on comparable repositioning attempts in the financial services sector, cross-referencing with Hargrove's own numbers, which she knew because she had been the one to reorganize the filing room 2 years ago and had read, because she was who she was, everything in it. Her projections were not a beautiful ski slope, they were a cliff. She knew she should say something. She also knew that nobody at Hargrove & Associates had ever looked at her as someone whose analysis was worth hearing. She thought about it for 3 weeks. She went back and forth. She told herself it wasn't her problem. She told herself that smart people with MBAs from schools she'd only seen on television had reviewed this plan and signed off on it. She told herself that maybe she was wrong. Then one Thursday morning she walked past the main conference room, and through the glass wall she saw the partners gathered for what she recognized as the final pre-launch strategy meeting. And she saw the slide on the screen at the front of the room. The ski slope graph, the projected numbers, the new logo, and something in her chest went very still and very certain at the same time. She stopped the cart. She stood outside the glass wall for approximately 4 seconds. Then she knocked on the door. The room went quiet in a way that was different from regular quiet. It was the quiet of people recalibrating. Nell counted 9 people at the table, 6 senior partners, 2 junior partners, and Hargrove's chief of staff, a woman named Christine. No, scratch that, the chief of staff was someone else now. The chief of staff was a man named Ray who had been hired 8 months ago from a firm in Boston, and who had, in Nell's observation, a very high opinion of his own instincts. At the head of the table was the firm's managing director, a man named Warren Holt. Warren Holt was 62 years old, had silver hair he wore combed back precisely, and had the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough rooms to know that whoever spoke first in an uncomfortable silence usually lost something. He looked at Nell. She looked at him. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. She was not, precisely, sorry. "My name is Nell Delaney. I work in facilities. I've been with the firm for 6 years, and I have some information that I think is directly relevant to what you're deciding right now, and I would like 10 minutes to share it." Someone at the table made a sound. It wasn't quite a laugh. It was the conversational equivalent of an eye roll, which is somehow worse. Ray, the chief of staff, cleared his throat. "Miss Delaney," she said. "Miss Delaney, this is a closed executive strategy session. Perhaps if you have something to share, you can submit it through the appropriate." "The launch is scheduled for 60 days from today," Nell said. "If I'm right about what I've found, 60 days from today will be too late." The room was quiet again, different quiet this time. Warren Holt, who had still not moved, said, "Sit down, Miss Delaney." She had brought her notebook. She had also, because she had been planning this moment for 3 weeks even when she'd been telling herself she wasn't going to do it, brought a printed summary. 4 pages, double-sided, with her projections and her sources listed at the bottom. She had printed it at the library. She had checked the math 4 times. She distributed it. Some people took the pages the way you take something from a stranger on the street, holding it at a slight distance, not immediately looking at it. She didn't let that slow her down. She had 10 minutes. She used 9 of them. She walked them through the Prestige Initiative as she understood it, which was more thoroughly than some of the people in that room understood it. She walked them through the comparable repositioning attempts she'd researched. 3 firms in the past decade that had tried to move upmarket by abandoning their core client base. She told them what had happened to each one. She walked them through the math on Hargrove's current revenue dependency. 72% of the firm's annual revenue came from clients who fell below the new pricing structure's minimum threshold. If you push those clients out, she said, you will need to replace 72% of your revenue with premium clients in a market where you currently have no relationships, no reputation, and no track record. This firm does not have the runway to survive that transition. She said it clearly. She said it without apology. Then she said, I could be wrong. These are my projections, and I'm a facilities associate with a business degree from Ohio State and 6 years of paying attention. You should absolutely have your financial team verify everything I've shown you. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to check before you commit. She closed her notebook. She waited. Ray, the chief of staff, went first. He was not, to his credit, dismissive. He was something more sophisticated than dismissive, which was carefully measured skepticism with a side of condescension. He questioned her methodology. He questioned her data sources. He pointed out with some relish that the outside consulting firm Hargrove had engaged had teams of analysts with significantly more experience than a facilities associate. Nell said, I know. I've read their report. They didn't account for client retention risk because they built their model on industry averages instead of Hargrove's actual client composition. The averages look fine. Hargrove's specific situation is not fine. Ray looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Warren Holt, one of the senior partners, a woman named Patricia who had been at the firm for 20 years and who had, Nell knew, expressed private reservations about the Prestige Initiative to at least 2 colleagues. Because she'd overheard those conversations, leaned forward and picked up the printed summary. She read for a moment. Her expression changed. Where did you get the revenue breakdown figures? Patricia asked. The annual summary reports from the filing room, Nell said. I reorganized the filing room in 2022. Those reports are confidential. They were in an unlocked cabinet that I was specifically asked to reorganize. Patricia turned to Warren Holt. Warren, these numbers on client revenue concentration, are these consistent with what we have internally? Warren Holt had been reading the summary since Nell had said it in front of him. He had read it all the way through without expression. He said, I'll need to verify, but they look consistent. Ray looked like he wanted to say something. He thought better of it. They did not make a decision that day. That was not how these things worked, and Nell had not expected them to. What she had expected What she had allowed herself to hope for, carefully, without letting it expand too much, was that she would put the information in the room and let it do what information does when it lands in front of people who are honest enough to engage with it. She returned to her cart. She finished her shift. She went home. For the next 2 weeks, she heard nothing. She told herself that was fine. She had done what she could do. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, as she was replacing a light bulb in the hallway outside Warren Holt's office, the same hallway, the same flickering light she'd been meaning to get to for a month, his assistant, a young man named Kevin, appeared in the doorway and said, "Mr. Holt would like to see you when you have a moment." Nell finished replacing the bulb. Then she knocked on Warren Holt's open door. Warren Holt's office was the kind of office that did not try to impress you. That, paradoxically, was how it impressed you. The furniture was good but not flashy. The bookshelves were actually full of books that had actually been read. Nell could tell by the way the spines were cracked. There was a small framed photo on the desk of a man and a dog standing on a hiking trail somewhere green. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. "I had our CFO verify your numbers," he said. "She confirmed the revenue concentration figures and the client retention data. Your methodology on the comparative analysis has some gaps, but the general conclusion holds." Nell said nothing because he wasn't done. "We've suspended the Prestige Initiative pending a comprehensive review," he said. "That review is going to take approximately 6 weeks. I'd like you to be part of it." She looked at him. "Part of it in what capacity?" "In whatever capacity makes sense after we talk for a while." He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Delaney." So she did. She told him about Ohio. She told him about the business degree she'd paid for herself and the 43 job applications and the 11 interviews and the 0 offers. She told him about 6 years of pushing a cart and watching and listening and learning everything there was to learn about this firm from the outside of all its rooms. She told him about the notebook. She told him she still had every notebook, 7 of them, going back to her first year. When she was done, Warren Holt was quiet for a moment in the particular way of someone who is deciding something. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly even if the honest answer seems presumptuous." "Okay," she said. "If you had walked into this firm 6 years ago as a junior advisor, where do you think you'd be now?" Nell considered the question, not the flattering version of the answer, the real one. "Senior advisor," she said. "Maybe junior partner." Warren Holt nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." He picked up his phone and called someone. He said, "Can you come to my office?" A pause. "Yes, now." He set the phone down. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," he told Nell. "She runs our advisory practice development team. I've been wanting to build out a client strategy function for about 2 years and haven't found the right person." "I don't have my licenses," Nell said. It was the thing she needed to say because it was true. "Licenses can be obtained," he said. "Judgment cannot be installed." The person Warren Holt had called was a woman named Adrienne Cole, who was sharp and a little intimidating and who looked at Nell with the particular expression of someone doing rapid recalibration. She asked good questions. Nell answered them honestly. She did not oversell herself. She also did not undersell herself, which had historically been her greater risk. At one point, Adrienne said, "Walk me through how you would have approached the client retention problem without the data from the filing room. If you'd never had access to those numbers, how would you have built the argument?" Nell walked her through it. She had thought about this, actually, because she'd known the filing room access was a weak point. She had a version that relied only on public information. It was less precise, but it pointed in the same direction. Adrienne looked at Warren. Warren looked at Adrienne. "When can you start?" Adrienne asked. Nell blinked. "Start what?" "We're going to create a role," Adrienne said. "Client intelligence and strategy. It's going to take a few weeks to get the formal structure right. You'll need to begin your licensing coursework. But when can you start learning this job?" "I've been learning it for 6 years," Nell said. That was the first time Warren Holt smiled. There was a moment a few days later that Nell hadn't anticipated. She was still finishing out her notice period in facilities, 2 weeks, because she was not the kind of person who left things untidy, when Ray, the chief of staff, appeared in the hallway while she was mopping near the elevator bank. He stopped. She looked up. He said with some effort, "I want to say that I may have been too quick to dismiss your presentation." Nell straightened up. "I appreciate that." A pause. "I looked at your client composition analysis again," he said. "Specifically the section on revenue concentration in the 40 to 60 bracket. I think you may have been conservative." She had, in fact, been conservative. She'd done it deliberately because she hadn't wanted her projections to look alarmist. She said, "I know." I weighted down a few of the assumptions in case my data was incomplete. Ray looked at her for a moment with an expression she didn't entirely have a name for. Then he said, "You're going to be good at this." She wasn't sure if it was an apology or a concession or something else entirely. She decided it didn't matter much. She said, "Thanks, Ray," and went back to mopping because she still had 2 days left and she did the job she was being paid to do until the last day, the same way she always had. The comprehensive review took 7 weeks instead of 6. Nell sat in on 12 meetings. She learned in those 7 weeks that several of the senior partners had harbored doubts about the Prestige initiative but had not voiced them because the outside consulting firm's endorsement had made disagreement feel risky. She learned that Patricia, the senior partner who had been the first to actually read her summary in the conference room, had raised concerns 18 months earlier that had been tabled and never revisited. She learned that being right was a necessary condition but not a sufficient one. You also had to be in the room at the right moment, and sometimes being in the room at the right moment meant knocking on a door that was technically closed to you. She thought about that a lot. The Prestige initiative was officially shelved. In its place, Hargrove developed what they called the Core Client Deepening Strategy. Not a glamorous name, Nell thought, and she said so, and they eventually landed on something better, which focused on expanding services for their existing client base rather than abandoning it. The revenue projections were more modest. They were also, unlike a ski slope, achievable. Nell got her securities licenses. It took 8 months of studying after work, which was familiar to her, the working hard after work thing. She passed the exams on the first attempt, both of them. The role Adrian had described became real. Nell's job, formally, was to develop the intelligence and research function that Hargrove had never had, a systematic way of understanding what clients actually needed rather than what the industry averages suggested they probably needed. She was good at it. She was, it turned out, exceptionally good at it, which surprised no one who had watched her pay attention for 6 years. She kept the notebooks, all 7 of the old ones, and then the new ones she started after, because paying attention was not something she had ever done for tactical reasons. It was just how she was built. She noticed things. She wrote them down. She looked for patterns. That had been true when she was mopping floors, and it was true when she was presenting analysis to the partners at the quarterly review, and she didn't see any reason it should change. About a year into the new role, one of the junior advisors, a young man just out of graduate school, earnest and a little lost, asked her how she had developed her instincts for client behavior. He meant it as a compliment. He was expecting, she could tell, a professional answer about frameworks and methodologies. She said, "I paid attention for 6 years to what people actually said when they thought no one was listening." He looked at her, unsure if she was joking. "I'm not kidding," she said. "Stop trying to analyze clients. Start trying to know them. There's a difference." He nodded uncertainly. She suspected he would understand it later, if he was paying the right kind of attention. Warren Holt retired 14 months after the day Nell knocked on the conference room door. At his retirement dinner, which was held in the firm's main conference room, the same glass-walled room, he gave a short speech. He talked about the firm and what he hoped for it and the people he was grateful to. Near the end, he said, "The best business decision I made in my last 2 years here was opening a door when someone knocked on it." Nell was sitting at the far end of the table. She did not look up when he said it. She felt the heat in her face anyway. Adrian, sitting next to her, leaned over and said quietly, "He's talking about you." "I know," Nell said. "You're allowed to look pleased." Nell looked up. Across the table, Warren Holt caught her eye and held it for a moment. He nodded very slightly. She nodded back. She was not the janitor who became CEO. She was not a fairy tale. She was a woman who had done her job completely and paid attention constantly and waited, not passively but actively, for the moment when the information she had accumulated could actually land somewhere it would matter. She had knocked on a door. She had been prepared for that door. She had done the work that made being prepared possible long before she knew the door existed. There was no twist at the end where her lowly position was revealed to have been a test. There was no secret benefactor who had been watching all along. There was just 6 years of invisible labor that happened to produce visible insight. And one morning when she decided that staying quiet was a choice she didn't want to keep making. The position was never the point. The position was what happened when she finally stopped pretending that what she knew didn't count just because of where she'd learned it.